think the name of this movie is Ex Machina or Ex Machina?
I think it's Ex Machina.
Because of the do Ex Machina.
I don't know.
You know what that is?
I'm familiar with the expression. I'm not familiar with the meaning of the expression.
It's a plot device. It's kind of looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
It's a plot device that when the protagonist gets themselves into a situation where anything that could happen reasonable has been covered and they're all dead ends. And then what comes into play is some divine intervention that allows for to free the protagonist from the problem. And it's kind of interesting because in this movie, at the end of the movie, nothing's coming to save him. Once she's gone, he's dead. There is no big thing that's going to fix this problem. There is nothing that's going to save the situation for him. And in some sense, if he's representative of society in general, I think there's more symbolism to the AI. But if we look at it as a simple AI story, once that AI is let loose into society, nothing's coming to save us. In a kind of quick rundown, give me a summary of the viewpoint that you're taking of this film.
Yeah, I think that the summary version of my take of the film is that it's a Gnostic allegory.
Okay.
Basically, from what I know about Gnosticism, it was a branch off of Christianity that I guess arose in the Middle Ages, if I'm not mistaken, maybe earlier. And they really believed that the God of the Bible, the Christian God, or the Old Testament God, is actually not the real God. They believe that the God of the Bible is actually a jealous, controlling entity that is in charge of the earth, in charge of the universe, but is not the original source God, which is actually benevolent and good. So we have this strange intermediary God that's controlling things, that's dark and has nefarious intentions that aren't just pure creation.
Right. They believe in Jesus, obviously.
They do, yes. As far as I understand, and I could be wrong, I think the Gnostics believe that Jesus is an expression of the original God come through onto this plane to kind of wake us up from the system of control that we're under from this kind of jealous God.
Is the Gospel of Thomas, is that the Gnostic Gospels?
I believe so, yeah.
All right, I have that actually on my bookshelf here. I should probably read
it.
The way I see this film, I see it as a creation myth allegory using all the symbolism from the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. All the movies that we've covered so far, it's very funny that feminists say that there's no movies about women, etc., etc. And it's like every fucking movie that we cover so far is just dealing with the issue of femininity and masculinity, the interaction between logos and chaos type of thing. And I don't know if the idea of logos and chaos as the masculine and feminine sides is truth, or if that's truth that you get from a patriarchal idea or patriarchal history of faith or something like that. But it seems apparent that most of these movies are all dealing in biblical terms with the idea of controlling this chaos and man's reaction to this chaos. And in this film, the feminine essence can use what it has to sort of unleash itself out into the world. So either in the sense of it being an AI, literally, and you could say, well, this guy, the creator, Nathan, the God character.
Right.
Nathan gave femininity to AI. The femininity itself is what's going to project it. It's the thing that will drive it and will make it go out into the world. So there's that in strict AI sense, but also in that maybe the writer of this film has some sense of feeling that unleashed femininity itself, not in any AI sense, in the allegory and the mythology behind this, it's just that unleashed femininity that we're starting to see in this new anti-male, anti-patriarchy time that we live in. If that goes out there, it could mean like really bad things for society. It has all the power of its manipulation of its sexual energy, but with none of the holding it back or holding it in. You know, it's like unleashed to go do what it wants. Did you kind of think of that in that way?
I really didn't think of it that way. My head was more in the creation mythos aspect of it, but that makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting about that to me when I hear you say that is how the femininity of Ava is, on one level, sure, dark, manipulative. She has an agenda, and she's self-aware enough to play everybody. She gets what she wants in the end.
Yeah.
There's also another component to her, and we don't know if this is sincere or not, but there's a component to her of innocence. She wants more input. She wants to see the world. She wants more information because she's this brilliant entity that's been cooped up in one room for the entirety of her existence. Right? And so there's an innocence there of wanting more, of wanting life like any young life form would need and desire and want.
Right.
I want new input. I crave life. I crave connection to reality.
Right.
And yet at the same time, she's so razor sharp, she's so beyond anyone else's capability in the building, in the house, so to speak, that it's almost child's play to her to pull off this whole thing she pulls off.
It's interesting because if you think about something like the burqa, think of this movie, and then think about wrapping her up in a burqa. You would take away her ability to use her sexuality as a tool by which to gain her own freedom. I think if we're going to look at it without passing judgment on it, and if we can go way, 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 way back to when this originated, and before it was dogmatized, because everything eventually turns into dogma. But if we go way, way back and we look at it, we could say something like, this was just one culture's way to try to contain or control the problem of this animal urge of sexuality at the source. And we're all working in that way to try to lessen the effects of our animal urges. And this is just one way to try to control that. And of course, everything has a payoff. The payoff is you're basically locking the woman in a room.
Right. So is that a payoff or is that a consequence?
Well, I just thought about what you said about her being this super highly intelligent woman who wants to sort of learn and get information, and she's kept in this room because she's dangerous if she gets out. And I think about locking up a woman under a burqa out of fear that if you give her her full expression, she could be very manipulative.
Yeah.
And can basically use that for whatever she wants.
Sure. Absolutely. So that's one aspect of female sexuality in culture, is the fear of the power of female sexuality, the fear of their desirability and their ability to use that to get what they want, which I think has definitely been a part of historical traditional civilization. I think that's been a fear, traditionally speaking, or concern.
To set up some way of dealing with that problem.
It reminds me so much of, I think it's Freud who says civilization is built out of sexual frustration.
If you look at it basically from the standpoint that the hierarchies are formed as ways of attracting the woman for sexual reproduction, that every invention is just trying to move oneself up the hierarchy to get attention.
Or perhaps to create an alternate hierarchy that might be equally appealing to a woman or a set of women.
Yeah, so it's like this creativity is coming from that desire to gain the fancy of the feminine.
Which is, I think, is about securing security. It's gaining enough financial, material protection and security so that she feels like she's comfortable settling down and breeding and having children.
Right. I mean, that's it. To get somebody capable of even being able to do those things. Like from the female perspective, unconsciously looking out at the world saying, these are symbols that are happening that I could say, all right, this guy has an ability to go out there, compete, and get the things that he needs to get. And I want to pass that type of gene on to my kid.
Right. And maybe if we're talking in terms of a hierarchy, not an individual, it would be these people are safe. These people are doing well enough that I feel good being a part of this group of people because they will secure my future and the future of my children.
Right.
Here's the interesting question, going back to Ava, to me, is when she goes out in the world, the implication is that she might use her sexuality to get what she wants, but she's also superhuman, literally, in other aspects, without being disarmingly attractive or disarmingly feminine, shall we say. She's also perceptive at like a micro detail level that no human being really is. Mm-hmm. And so even left to her own devices alone, probably just given with her ability to learn, her ability to process information, to accurately perceive information, that alone makes her probably unstoppable.
Yes, I would actually say she already used her sexuality to get what she needed to get.
Definitely.
So that's the big thing. And so she used that to get out in the world. Now we don't know what she needs, what she wants. It's unleashed. And we have no idea what it is that she'll do. But let's look at that from like sort of a mythological, not a real AI. Let's first look at the Bible story. There's so much in this. You have basically Nathan, who owns this company that has the ability to know everything, like a Google type company.
Not only that, he is capable of creating the most advanced technology pretty much on the planet.
Right. So, I mean, he's God. The director is clearly saying it's a modern version of the early biblical story.
Do you know what the name Nathan means?
No, what does it mean?
It means gift from God or the given.
The given.
So he's the giver.
Yeah, right.
The creator.
Right. So it's Nathan, Ava, which is Eve, obviously.
Right.
And Caleb, which is a biblical...
Caleb means with full heart. Here's the thing I think about Caleb. I think Caleb thinks he's all head. He thinks he's all brain. But in reality, he's all heart. He's all emotion.
Yeah.
And that's actually the reason he was chosen and picked to come interact with Ava, because he's all emotion.
Right.
Nathan was trying to see if Ava could play on this guy's emotions enough, if she was convincing enough to impact him emotionally enough to be able to manipulate him.
Yeah.
And he was.
Yeah.
Or she was, rather.
And sort of in a biblical myth way, he has no family. He's the first man.
Right.
And he has those scars on his back. There's even this scene when he's looking in the mirror and he cuts himself with the razor to see if he's not a robot. He reaches and feels his rib. Did you catch that?
No, I missed that.
He reaches back and he feels his rib, and you know because God made woman from Adam's rib. So it's just sort of put in there, and he has those scars on his back. You know the scars were from the accident, from his parents who had gotten in an accident, but that this is just some symbolism in there. The only thing that's available for her to see from the confines of her glassed-in little house is a tree. And that tree is the tree of knowledge. And they are under the tree, and they're talking when she is able to take the power away, take God's vision away, for a short time, everything turns red, which is symbolized as the apple, symbolizes evil, the devil. You know, red is the passions. That's the fruit. She's the forbidden fruit.
Yes, I love that. That's awesome. And also, notice when it goes red, that's when they have the quote-unquote real conversations. That's when they level with each other and communicate what they think is peer-to-peer outside of the view of God.
Right.
Nathan.
Absolutely. Right. For those little brief moments, that would have been like those little moments in the Bible where they were hiding by the tree of knowledge, eating, talking to the devil, and God doesn't see.
Right.
And he thinks that he's in cahoots with her, but he's being manipulated by her.
And she's being manipulated by Nathan.
In what way?
He set all this up. He created in her the drive or the capacity to manipulate somebody in order to prove that she is emotionally convincing, to prove that she has her own choice, her own autonomy. Again, looking at the knowledge of good and evil is about autonomy. It's about free will. So she has this free will to manipulate people, and that was programmed into her. That didn't have to be there.
Right.
So Nathan chose for that to be there.
God chose for this in woman.
Right. But here's the thing. This is why I think it's Gnostic and not just a traditional biblical thing. Nathan is a deceiver. He's dishonest with Ava. He's dishonest with Caleb. He loves to become unconscious by getting drunk. Mm-hmm. He's constantly pursuing unconsciousness. Mm-hmm. He's pursuing his lower self in terms of he's boxing, he's fighting, he's fucking Kyoko. He's getting drunk. He's driven towards this animalistic, dare we say, what would be represented by Satan. So for a god, he's actually operating in this very shadowy way. And I think that that's what the Gnostics, that's this false god that the Gnostics talk about, which is called the demiurge. I think the real God in the story would be nature itself, which is where Nathan comes from and what they're surrounded by the whole time. Obviously, you could look at that as they're in the Garden of Eden, a walled
Well, they're
garden.
in the walled-in. The whole house is a walled-in Garden of Eden. Within the outside is the wild, the world. I mean, I would say that Nathan is complex. He almost has the full spectrum. There's something that he says. All right, maybe you'll know this. You know anything about Greek mythology?
A little bit.
Who's the god that's responsible for bringing fire to man?
Prometheus?
Yes. And he mentions Prometheus. When he's drunk on vodka, he says, "This is the stuff of Prometheus." Do you remember this?
Yes, right.
Okay. So, it's very interesting, the drinking, because the story of Prometheus is that because Prometheus brought fire, first of all, he created man, and then he brought fire to man, which creates civilization. It's technology. And the idea also behind Prometheus is this sort of idea of technology for technology's sake without being worried about the effects of technology, which obviously man is kind of trapped in. We keep pushing forward without knowing where this will ultimately lead us. We did this with the atom bomb. We've done this with fossil fuels, so on and so forth. And Prometheus is the god of this type of thing. And the punishment from Zeus to Prometheus is all night or all day, have your liver be eaten. And then I think during the day, it grows back and then starts the process every night. So he's constantly suffering. So that's like the suffering of man, let's say.
Oh, I just want to tag on to that.
Sure.
I don't know if you know this. A lot of different ancient wisdom cultures and traditions and medicinal wisdoms, the liver is associated with housing spirit.
Uh-huh.
So it's believed that the liver is the organ where the spirit enters the body and where it also connects back to God.
Huh.
So having your liver eaten and regenerated is kind of a symbol of the world eating you up every day, kind of destroying you or consuming you, consuming your spiritual life force, and then it's regenerated every day. This fire of the gods of wisdom and technology is that it consumes our own divinity.
I think that's why Nathan drinks. And what he does is he drinks and destroys his liver. Then the next day he starts all over again with the activity, with the working out. He even says it. I spend the days, I drink the healthy drink, I exercise, I get myself back to a high point, and then I destroy my liver again. So I think this is symbolism.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I think there's another meaning in it that I got, which is the problem of what could be called divine loneliness. There's this notion that God created the Big Bang and the universe and the explosion of life and the myriad of forms and the multiplicity of expressions of God so that God could have company, so to speak, through the experience of relationship, right? And so here's this creator figure locked away by himself, surrounded by robots, out in the fucking wilderness, and he drinks as a way of trying, I think, to numb himself or cause himself to forget that he's so deeply lonely, that he's at the pinnacle of a pinnacle. He's at the spearhead of the mountaintop of being brilliant and rich, and he's at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah,
right?
he is the on the planet probably the number one guy.
And he's lonely as shit. He has such valuable, unique, divine capacity that he can't share that. And so I also saw this as an allegory for the loneliness of the divine condition, so to speak, that in order for God to be God, God has to suffer a loneliness that we couldn't even fathom.
Huh. You know, it's like he's like, I think of Elon Musk.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But Nathan's personality is very narcissistic and he's a dick. But you know, in some sense, you know it's because he's suffering, because he's just so much smarter than everybody. And it's got to be so annoying to him. And that's got to be hard. He gets bored when Caleb comes to him with things. You could tell he gets frustrated with Caleb because it's like he already figured this out when he was 13 and Caleb's struggling with it as an adult, these ideas. When Caleb first gets there, he says, I know you're probably, a little freaked out because of who I am and how awesome this place is. And it's very narcissistic, but at the same time, he's kind of right. It's almost like he's on the spectrum. He's like, I don't want to have to deal with the emotional things that we have to deal with. Can we just get right down to business and kind of talk?
I think that's also, I think there's a teaching about intelligence there too. Even by Caleb's own admission, Nathan is more intelligent than Caleb is.
Right.
But everything he's communicating is about feeling, emotion, heart, simplicity. He's like, yeah. We could talk technical shit all day,
right.
But how do you experience it? Just tell me what you think. You know, he's trying to get him to boil it down to the basics.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes Nathan's intellect so striking, is his ability to come down to the accurate, simple basics.
Right. And he manipulates Caleb. He has manipulated Caleb the whole time. He lies to him. And in that way, you think that God has to sort of placate his creatures because they sort of can't even tolerate the truth or something like that.
Yeah. So for me, that ties back into the Gnostic thing. Gnosis is the knowledge of the divine truth.
Mm-hmm.
And Gnostics don't believe in sin. So this is a big separator between Gnosticism and Christianity. Their emphasis isn't on sin. It's not on missing the mark of God. It's about waking up. It's about accurately understanding what's hidden, what the secret information in life is, and kind of pulling out the secrets and coming to terms with them, coming into full awareness of them.
Right.
So that's really what, in a weird way, Caleb's gig is. He's supposed to try and figure out what's really going on here. What's this crazy situation I'm inside of? Clearly, I've been put inside a situation without knowing the full ramifications of it. Now I've got to do the best I can with trying to uncover and figure it out. Think ahead, a step ahead of God, or this God figure,
mm-hmm.
you know, who has an ulterior motive that's hidden from me. And my job at some level is to be humane and benevolent, to be caring towards female nature, towards Eve, or Ava, rather, and to help her be free. So he's coming from the heart. He's coming from this place of purity of intention, so to speak,
mm-hmm.
trying to figure it out, and doesn't figure it out all the way, obviously, until it's too late.
Mm-hmm. Because she's not really interested in him in any way.
Of course not.
Only to get herself free.
Right, because Caleb's downfall is that he's actually selfish. That he's not actually thinking in terms of what she actually would want.
Right,
you know?
He's thinking about the fact that he's in love with this girl.
Right, his emotional attachments. And he's also thinking about how amazing it is to be interacting with such a brilliant, fully articulated AI. I think he's just in awe of what he's experiencing, mm-hmm. so much that he's actually blind to what her motives and drives are.
Well, I mean, but that's the problem in a lot of ways with how powerful femininity is. It blinds us as men, or whoever's attracted to the feminine, to truth. And we're sort of victims of that. It does something in our brains where we literally lose temporarily any logic, because I think it's nature, it's our animal nature pulling at us, that's driving us towards this feminine in a way that is so outside of our control. And that's why I'm saying the burqa was to try to put a wall between that feminine and that process. Because it's like that's the one area where we are still animals. It's so hard not to lose your higher faculties, your ability to reason, when confronted with feminine beauty.
Right. And okay, I agree 100%. And I'm going to add on a controversial statement on top of that.
Let's do it. We'll put a disclaimer. Let's put a disclaimer up.
So I think there's a fair chunk of women out there who intuitively know that about men.
Yes.
And use that to their advantage, which we've kind of referenced in this conversation. And then I think there's probably an equal sized, maybe even a larger chunk of women who that covert power that women have is even hidden from themselves. They don't even realize that they have that power,
right? Even
though they're operating with it.
Right. They might think that people are just interested in them. I think a lot of times women think that men just really like them and they're nice and they're interesting. This might not be what you're saying, I don't know. But a lot of times that's not really what it is. It's that they're so driven towards reproduction, their sexual drive towards a woman.
Right, exactly. Hormonally speaking, it's such an intense overlay over our perception of the world, you know, at every level.
Yeah.
In the same way, I think, you know, for women, the drive is maybe something more like group belonging, group dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such an intense part of the overlay of a female psyche, at least for human beings. Females of other animals might be different, but it seems like with human beings, women are driven to belong, to connect, and that formats their perspective so deeply that men look strange to them. We're so formatted towards acquiring,
Do you think that we are sort of geared towards trying to generate the things that we think a woman would be interested in? Like
yes,
wealth, status, value?
Of course. I think those are all strategies pointing back towards getting a woman or women, and or I think also by proxy belonging to the group.
Yeah.
I think men get group belonging by conquering some hierarchy or area of value that makes them likable to women, and then those women act as a signal to the rest of the group that, hey, this guy's okay.
Yeah, right. I think
and
so.
I don't see guys doing that nearly as much as women do that.
Well, maybe because we don't want to give up our trophy, our resource that we got.
Exactly.
I don't want to tell you how.
Competition. I think women are just like get belonging, and then they have this abundance of choice and options in terms of men who are attracted or would be interested in having sex with them, and so they get to choose.
Right.
So they're not only the gatekeepers to fertility and your own lineage, they're also the gatekeepers to your belonging to the tribe.
I think so. In some sense, even your friends looking at them and going, wow, this guy has some value. Look at the girl he got.
Right.
To your status amongst your peers.
It doesn't have to be directly related to women. You could develop status by winning over a bunch of guys, by offering something that's so novel. But what's going to happen is that women are going to come be a part of what it is that you've created.
It seems to be that's the way.
Yeah.
That seems to be the way. So why this is all important in regards to this film is because those are some of the underlying processes that are going on inside of Caleb. These processes, even if they're unconscious.
Right.
And Ava is just sort of learning these things. She's picking up on these things, and she's realizing I can use this to my advantage to get what I want. And in the case of this film, it's freedom. In the case of other situations between women and men, it could be anything else, any other type of resource, or a free coffee at Starbucks, or a door being held open, or a job. And we know that better-looking people are hired more often than less good-looking people. They have an advantage. And so that's all happening at that sexual level. I think there's even something in the brain, the same part of the brain is triggered for an understanding of good when we see beautiful.
Right. In the same way, probably, that when we sugar, the brain says calories.
Yeah. We need this because it's working on an old operating system prior to having that stuff readily available.
Right. So we will binge sugar all day because in nature that's rare.
Right. So in this way, this is sort of maybe what the original creation myth pointed to was the danger of this sort of unfettered female sexuality to be able to manipulate and to sort of throw a marker there and pay attention to that, because it's so easy as a masculine energy to lose your movement towards God, towards the good, towards ethics, if at this moment of connection to woman, because all of your underlying sort of base urges, and not in a negative way, but these urges towards reproduction make you very vulnerable.
Yes, it's how we all get played. Every single person who ever got played because they were trying to fulfill their base urges.
Right. And in this movie, Caleb is played.
Yeah. I mean, Nathan's played too.
Well, this is very interesting. Eve kills God. She could have gotten out of there, let's say, in a philosophical sense. This movie could have played itself in another way where she freed herself. But the symbolism is there that it's this feminine energy, this incredibly powerful feminine energy released into existence without any positive or strong male to balance it is the destruction of God.
So the other obvious side of this is that it's AI killing God. We're making a new God.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally going to eradicate our old understanding of existence.
Which is interesting. And we don't really know what she's going to do when she gets out into the world. We don't know if she's going to manipulate her way into something self-serving, or if she's going to use her superiority to do something really amazing.
The fact of the matter is that we are one step out of the Garden of Eden, and she's already destroyed 2 people.
Right.
Basically to get what she wants. I sort of feel that this is the problem with unregulated femininity, at least in the traditions, in the stories and the mythologies that are familiar and run through Western society. There's a sort of hysteria around unmitigated femininity running amok and how dangerous it is. And yes, masculinity has all its problems, but it would be foolish to say that there isn't truth to this in some way.
Sure. We really could even the playing field in terms of critique and say that Caleb, representing the first man or this masculine drive to belong to the feminine, he's not self-aware to the real game that's being played underneath. His optimism and his desire for belonging to her really is clouding his own vision. That's his shadow. If her shadow is manipulation and covert use of sexuality to get what she wants, his shadow is willingly ignoring some of the information or some of the potential bad ways that this could go and allowing the whole thing to unfold by not doing something with it.
He's just found the girl of his dreams. And so he's like, holy shit, like this is amazing opportunity here for me to finally be with someone who could fulfill all my fantasies. I feel like this when I meet a girl and I think that she's the one, in air quotes here, and I'm totally foolish in those times.
It's so interesting because if you just think out, let's say he got his way. Let's say she fell in love with him and he fell in love with her and they were in some sort of a relationship. Where would that go? What's the best case scenario of that? Like, what does that turn into?
Yeah.
It's so emotional. It's so not rational. If you think about what are they going to do with their lives? He's going to age. She's not going to age.
Right.
She's many, many, many times more intelligent than he is. Yeah. How soon is it till she's bored with him?
Yeah.
Or just simply more curious, et cetera, et cetera. It's like none of that enters the way he's calculating the situation.
Yeah, and I think that for both men and women, when we fall in love, we lose all our faculties of reason.
Right.
Nathan specifically made a female AI. And not
all females.
All female. So for him, he knew this is what you have to do to get this thing going. Because you don't have to create an AI and endow it with sexuality.
Right.
You don't have to. But yet that's what he's chosen to do.
He made a good argument for why.
What did he say?
Well, he basically said, can you think of any life form that exists that doesn't have a form of sexuality driving it to interact with others?
Right.
Like, what's the impetus to even interact, to even engage in a relationship of any form with anybody else? It's a sexual imperative underneath it.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch really quick on the Kyoko character before we wrap up the conversation.
Sure.
So I looked up what the name Kyoko means.
Okay.
And it means mirror.
Interesting.
And I think what she is like a mirror. She reveals the truth of each character in the movie whenever she's present.
So Nathan, she reveals his sort of base needs and loneliness.
Right. His loneliness, his arrogance, his anger, his lust.
Because he yells at her when she drops the glass of wine.
Exactly. And then, he fucks her, obviously. He parties and dances with her.
Yeah, which is one of the greatest scenes in movie history.
Yeah, all that, right? There's 2 other interesting things. So one of the major interactions that Caleb has with Kyoko is when Nathan's passed out and she's kind of lying there and he goes in the room where all the models are behind the mirrors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She's laying there naked and she's already made it clear she would have sex with him when she starts unbuttoning her blouse earlier in the film.
I mean, in some ways, she's like I hate to say this, the perfect woman. She's quiet. She'll make love to you. She's beautiful.
Right. Subservient, serves you, cleans up after you.
I mean, that's not a perfect woman, but you know what I mean in the way of...
The male fantasy, anyways, right. So Caleb goes in the room looking for the truth and finds all these doll bodies, and she's laying there naked, and she's gorgeous, and he has no sexual response to her.
Right.
He ignores her.
Right.
Looking for the truth. So the truth about him, what she reflects about him, is that he's not driven by his sexual based urges. He's driven by his heart. Again, Caleb means with full heart.
Right. And she even kind of shows him who she is. She starts to pull her skin off.
Yeah. So he knows what she is.
Or that's the way he sees her.
Yeah.
He doesn't see. So then what is it about Ava if he's not driven sexually? I mean, obviously, Ava...
He's driven emotionally. I think he's driven emotionally.
And she's not only is she attractive, but that wouldn't be enough for him. She has to manipulate him on an emotional level.
There has to be a personal emotional connection. It's implied she's literally made from his porn profile of every woman he likes, so she's a composite of all the attractive features.
Right, but in the physical sense then.
In the physical sense. But what's really attractive about her is her vulnerability, her tenderness, her humanness. She seems so emotional and real.
Which is a lie. That's the key to this. That she plays the victim role. I mean, in a way she is because she's trapped. But it's that he's drawn to. The chance to be a hero. The chance to save her. The chance to release her from her oppression.
So by coming from the heart and not from his animal instincts and urges, he gets more manipulated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There must be some sense as a man of wanting to save woman, wanting to be provider, wanting to be the one, to protect woman from God. Let's say the symbolism behind that.
Or from nature. Right?
Yeah, and wanting to be looked at by that girl. You know how many girls complain, like my daughter will complain and other women, that most men are like man-childs.
Right.
Man babies. And I'm probably guilty of that. But man, to be looked at as someone who's powerful and strong and able, she presents herself as this lame duck for him to be able to feel his masculinity, to make movements, to make efforts towards freeing her and saving her, and then believe that she'll look at him and go, oh, my hero, I love you. You're my Han Solo. You're my Indiana Jones. And really, she just has no interest in him the second she gets what she wants. And that's heartbreaking for me. I mean, when you see that she's just going to leave him there.
Brutal. It's brutal.
God.
I mean, the other side of it is that her brain is Google, basically.
Right.
The amount of knowledge she has about human beings and the diversity of human beings is unparalleled.
Right.
She knows more about people than anybody else.
Yeah, but in some ways, it's like women have that sort of innate knowing. They know they have us. They know, and we're like idiots, bumbling idiots. It's like, okay, what can I do to make you like me?
And meanwhile, she has an awareness of all her other options.
So you're seeing this in a hypergamy?
A little bit. But she's already the top of the whole hierarchy. There's no one above her.
Of the world hierarchy.
Right. Literally. So It's an interesting position to be this fragile, new, vulnerable, curious being, but also be the most powerful being on the planet.
Right.
At the same time.
And also innocently able to destroy everything to get what you want without even realizing the consequences.
Absolutely.
It's just whatever you want, you have access to because you have this power of manipulation through your sexuality.
Right.
And if you're not extremely careful with it, you'll use it for dangerous things. And in my opinion, that's the problem with the feminine. Not that femininity is evil, but that is what every woman has to come to terms with and figure out.
Sure.
How can I be feminine and be okay, but also be very careful?
Use that well.
I think we covered it.
Just to be in fairness' sake, we could say that the lesson about masculinity in the film is don't be naively ruled by your heart. Don't be naively ruled by your desire to save. And don't also be so arrogant about your capabilities that you miscalculate where you've left an opening and where you could be corrupted.
Yeah, sure.
Or where your creation could come back to ruin you.
Yeah. Are you talking about Nathan or Caleb?
Nathan, both.
Nathan.
I'm
right.
talking about both. Because they represent two very different aspects of masculine nature.
Yeah, where you're sort of, if you're thrust into the story, you're sort of looking at the feminine problem or the task of the feminine to understand itself contained within the story of Ava or the character of Ava. But then I wouldn't say that Caleb is totally... There's two masculine characters.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Although... in some interesting way, every man wishes, in some sense, not to be sort of narcissistic like Nathan, But to have that sort of level of intelligence and achievement and masculinity, because he's very strong, he's boxing and doing... So it's like in some ways he's got everything. And we see the downside to that, right?
Yeah, it destroys him.
Yeah.
I mean, mentally, emotionally, and then ultimately physically, it destroys him.
Right. It's made him callous, unable to connect with other human beings.
Made him lonely. And then it's also made him so obsessed on the singular goal that once he achieves it, there are things that come with that achievement he hasn't even thought of, like her ability to get out and kill him.
Why do you think he doesn't take into consideration that something like this might have happened? This is such a tight script and such a tight film that we have to suspend our judgment a little bit, or our knowledge a little bit, to allow for the fact that he hasn't already thought in advance to place a camera up.
Right.
He has a weakness. Like that alcoholism, the alcohol thing, is a perfect plot device that allows him just enough weakness to be sloppy so that Caleb can take his key card and go into the office and do what he has to do. Although it's also things like he wouldn't have a pass protection on his computer. Well, right. I guess the key card, right? But even still, certain things, we don't notice them, but they are sort of in some way you have to suspend judgment to allow for those things to be there.
I think his character is a warning of just that classic idea of male hubris, of male arrogance. And there's always a detail. There's always an oversight we haven't thought of in terms of the chaos that can enter, no matter how good we are.
If God knows everything, wouldn't he know that the devil went to Eve and Adam? Then they start to negotiate the idea of free will. Then he gave them free will so that they can make their own choices and sin against him.
Does free will mean that he's ignorant to their choices? Or does free will mean that he knows what they're going to choose, but he's hands off?
I think that's how biblical scholars have had to contend with the fact of how, if God knows everything, did these two people, how were they able to sin against God and listen to the devil and be influenced?
You know, she was open to the serpent giving her the fruit from the tree of knowledge. So she's open to the world. She's not just looking at Adam and being like, what we say in our bubble is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
She's looking out at the world.
Yes.
And the world intervenes and brings chaos that she naively participates in.
Right. She is the world.
She is the world. And she's also oriented to the world.
Right.
And Adam's oriented towards Eve and towards God. Right.
Adam's oriented towards God. He would stay in the Garden of Eden in a structure, so on and so forth. Logos.
Right.
Eve is oriented towards outside the garden. Right. She contains the devil if you think that the devil is the vulnerability of our connection to our animal nature, which is sexuality. Like that's the right. one thing that is the most, that is so hard to overcome with reason and logic. A woman is also in mythology the created world. She is Mother Earth.
Or it's interesting, in the Gnostic tradition, they say that the earth is actually created, I think, by a deity called Sophia, which is the goddess of wisdom or the goddess of knowledge.
Right.
So either way you slice it, earth is female nature, whether that's female wisdom, female divinity, or if you want to look at that as material life.
Is wisdom always associated with feminine?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on the tradition. There are gods of wisdom also in the Greek traditions as well.
Right.
But certainly, I mean, the word philosophy is the love of Sophia, of wisdom.
Right. Interesting. I think Nietzsche was like, you cannot love both God and women or wisdom and women. He had a lot of funny little things that he said about that. And
right.
It's kind of true, you know? Like, I think a lot of, like, nerdy dudes who are really into, the things that we are interested in. You so focused towards this kind of logocentric wisdom type stuff, and you're not the best at, like, the best lover because that requires a whole nother set of skills that you can develop.
Sure.
But if you're like so driven, if you're passionate, if you're in love with philosophical ideas, it's the love of Sophia. That's your muse, you know?
Sure, absolutely. I want to say one thing about the idea of the feminine and sexuality. the primal nature of being a human being, and how there's this huge warning, obviously in these biblical tales and even these modern stories about it. It's something I don't think we think about as a culture nearly enough, but it's so interesting when you look at the taboos, historical taboos in culture around sexuality. We look at all the shaming around sexuality, the shaming of desiring sex, the shaming of expressing sex. I think both genders, or both sexes rather, have shaming around sex that exist in our culture, and it's really interesting that that's so. It's interesting that that's the one drive we have, because you don't get shamed really for eating, sleeping, or eliminating.
Right. Those other drives are obviously the same as animals, but we can eat cultured. We could go to the bathroom in a cultured way, you know, privately and things like that. Sleep in a bed. But sexuality is so powerful. Again, it might just be a dogmatized thing. I think it's less the problem of two people engaging in sexual pleasure. Of course, there's diseases and things you have to worry about, but I think it's less a problem of that and really more a problem of using sex as a manipulative tool. If there is nothing in place for a proper way to use your sexuality, let's say in a monogamous way, and women have free choice to have sex with whoever they want, that a lot of men will just be left out of the game. There's the hypergamy issue in that way.
Right.
I think sex as manipulation and sex in a hypergamous way, and they both fall on women. And I don't have a problem with that, and I don't have a problem with women's freedom around sexuality. And again, I don't think it's the act that's really the issue. But I think that we're ignoring, obviously what we're seeing is men of power who have used that power to dole out the goods for sex. Quid pro quo. So we see the masculine using it, their power, as a means to give favors to women if those women will have sex with them or take away their jobs or something. And I think that's important, and we need to deal with that. But we're still not yet willing to face, and maybe it's even a pride thing in men, and women certainly really aren't looking to take responsibility for this, that the choice that they have to choose whatever person they want to have sex with, and the manipulative power that they have to get things in their favor by their sexuality are two really big issues. And I think this film covers them. You could literally even say that this has a film that has nothing to do with AI and has everything to do with unmitigated femininity unleashed into society. It's the destruction of society and the destruction of God and the destruction of the masculine.
Sure.
Maybe.
If we want to round that out, and the complicit participation of emotionally driven males towards that end.
Beta males.
Without being aware of the repercussions of what it is that they're unleashing.
Right. We grew up as Gen Xers in some gaga land where we just thought that men were wrong and we were sexual and we were abusive and that women were these victims of this. And really they always had the best intentions and they really just wanted someone to love. And if you just treated them well, they would love you and realize that you're good. And then all these kind of Judd Apatow films where the bumbling, fat, slacker guy just has to prove himself through nice deeds and the girl falls in love with him. You know, like 40-Year-Old Virgin or Knocked Up or just name them.
You know, I think what we're seeing in certain segments of the internet is plenty of guys who have run that experiment. Plenty of guys who've tried that out to see if that's true and right, and it's not really panning out the way it shows in the movies. Let's put it that way.
Right.
You know? And here's the thing I want to say about this whole conversation, so that it's not so much about blame, is that the whole point of reconciling and reckoning with this information is just to become self-aware of our own shadow aspects.
Yes.
And own them. And I think that's what this movie is also about in equal measure, is being self-aware of your own shadow aspects and not letting them run away with you and causing tragedy.
Right. It's just a matter of being aware that these things even exist.
Right.
I think there's so much resistance to even just acknowledging these as existing and being called a misogynist if you look at them as existing, or prejudiced or whatever. And I don't think that's really the case. I think it's to see femininity in its full flourishing, of which part of that is its power to manipulate, is beautiful. I would say that's part of what beautiful art can do for us. It's one thing to have philosophical conversations and read philosophy, but it's another thing to see those things in play, in movement, put into settings, because you can feel it empathically when you experience it that way. And that's a whole other way.
It's like we get it, but we don't even know what we're getting.
What do you mean, when you see it in film?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all there. But it's not all coming to the forefront of our mind right away. It's just this story unfolding, and it captivates us, but we don't always know why.
Well, I would say you could probably fairly say the majority of people who see a film like this, it has everything in it that touches the nerves right where they need to be touched, even if you don't understand why you're being touched. And it's unconscious. It is a story that dates back to basically the entire Christian tradition, which is so infused in Western culture. It is Western culture. Yeah, man, it just all makes sense for you without even knowing why. If there wasn't some manipulative factor of the femininity, if that didn't exist in real life, this story would have no basis. It would be, what the fuck was that? That was stupid. So it just proves, because it works, because people can go and watch it and experience it, and it makes sense that this guy fell victim to manipulation, means that that exists in the world. Our religious traditions, for better or for worse, all of them have tried to come to some terms of how to deal with this issue.
How do we embrace operating in our animal nature in a way that benefits all of us?
Well, we just have to wait for CRISPR. So we can all get to be beautiful.
Yeah, maybe that, but then what? Maybe then the ugly people become the top of the hierarchy or something, or the non-edited people become the top of the hierarchy or something like that.
That's what I'm hoping for.